It was a night like no other. 701 BC. The air was thick with the scent of war. The ground trembled under the weight of an empire that had never known defeat. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, the most ruthless warriors of their time, stood outside the walls of Jerusalem, their victory all but certain. They had crushed kingdoms, burned cities to the ground, slaughtered nations without mercy. And yet, as the moon cast its pale light over their vast encampment, something unthinkable happened. By morning, an eerie silence hung over the battlefield. No sounds of marching, no battle cries, no life. 185,000 men, gone. Not a single sword was drawn, not a single arrow was fired, no struggle, no survivors, just bodies, lifeless, scattered beneath the rising sun. What really happened that night? Some say it was a plague striking without warning, reducing an army to dust in mere hours. Others whisper of a divine force, an angelic being sent from the heavens to deliver a warning to the world. But could it have been something more? A supernatural force moving in the shadows of history, an unseen power capable of erasing armies in a single night? And if so, could such a force still exist today? Historians have tried to explain it, scholars have debated it, but the records, scattered across time, only raise more questions. Lost accounts, ancient prophecies, cryptic messages buried in sacred texts. They all point to something far greater than a mere military disaster. And tonight, we're going to uncover the truth. We will take you deep into the heart of this mystery. We will explore lost records, hidden artifacts, and eerie coincidences that tie this event to other unexplained disasters throughout history. We will question everything: the power of divine intervention, the secrets of forgotten civilizations, and the forces that may still be shaping our world from the shadows. And we will ask the question no one dares to ask. Could this happen again? Stay with us as we unravel the mystery of the angel of death that wiped out 185,000 soldiers in a single night. Because this is not just a story. This is a warning. They were the nightmare of the ancient world, a force so ruthless, so terrifying, that entire cities surrendered without a fight just to avoid their wrath. They were the Assyrians, the masters of war. For centuries, their empire expanded like a living beast, consuming kingdoms, erasing cultures, and leaving behind nothing but smoking ruins and rivers of blood. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they annihilated them. The Assyrian army was unlike anything the world had ever seen. These warriors were engineered for destruction, their weapons crafted from iron, an advantage that made them nearly unstoppable. They perfected siege warfare, tearing down the strongest city walls with massive battering rams. And their cruelty, legendary. They didn't just kill, they made their enemies suffer. Captives were skinned alive, their bodies displayed as warnings to anyone who dared resist. Others were impaled on stakes, left writhing in agony under the burning sun. Survivors, forced into slavery, their entire histories erased from existence. To the Assyrians, fear was the most powerful weapon, and they wielded it better than anyone. At the helm of this empire stood one man, a man who laughed at the gods, a man who believed he was untouchable, a man whose arrogance would doom his entire army. King Sennacherib. To the world, Sennacherib was more than a king. He was a force of nature, brutal, fearless, merciless. Under his rule, the Assyrian Empire reached its peak. Cities burned, kings knelt, nations vanished. No one could challenge his power. And when he looked upon Jerusalem, he saw nothing but another city waiting to be crushed. Sennacherib had already conquered all of Judah. Jerusalem was the last to fall. He gathered his army, 185,000 of the most fearsome warriors the world had ever known. And he marched toward the city, ready to wipe it from existence. But Sennacherib wasn't just at war with men. He was at war with something else, something he did not understand, something he could not defeat. 701 BC, the people of Jerusalem stood trapped inside their walls. Outside, a sea of fire and iron, 185,000 warriors, the most powerful army in the world, and behind them, a king who believed himself invincible. The people were terrified. They had seen what happened to other cities. They knew the horrors waiting for them if they fell. And then came the message, a message that shook the city to its core. Sennacherib's warning, "Your God cannot save you. No nation has survived me. Bow before me or be destroyed." The world waited for Jerusalem to fall. No one had ever stopped the Assyrians. No one had defied Sennacherib. And yet, something unthinkable was about to happen, something that would echo through eternity. Because that night an invisible force descended upon the Assyrian camp, and by morning, 185,000 of the most powerful warriors in history were dead. No battle, no warning, just silence. What happened that night? Was it a plague, a divine judgment, a mystery beyond time? The truth is more terrifying than anyone could ever imagine, and the story is far from over. In a world ruled by steel and blood, where kings carved their names into history through war and conquest, one ruler chose a different path. A path of faith, a path of prayer, a path that would defy the most powerful empire of its time. King Hezekiah stood upon the walls of Jerusalem, gazing at the endless sea of Assyrian warriors below. 185,000 soldiers, armed with weapons that had torn through countless cities. An empire feared across the ancient world, the unstoppable war machine of King Sennacherib. And yet, Jerusalem still stood. The enemy had already conquered every fortified city of Judah. Now only one remained, and by all logic, its fate was already sealed. The people of Jerusalem trembled, not just in fear, but in despair. The Assyrians were known for their cruelty, their merciless destruction, their divine arrogance. But Hezekiah did something no other king would dare to do. He did not summon his generals. He did not prepare his chariots. Instead, he turned to God. It was an act of defiance unlike any other. A ruler who had the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders, who should have been preparing for battle, instead fell to his knees. Instead of building higher walls, he reopened the temple. Instead of gathering swords, he gathered his people to pray. Instead of trusting in the strength of men, he placed his trust in something far greater. And in doing so, Hezekiah made a choice that would not only save his kingdom, but redefine history itself. Because while Sennacherib relied on the power of war, Hezekiah relied on the power of faith. And as history has proven time and time again, faith is sometimes the strongest weapon of all. But the battle was not over. As the Assyrians closed in, a messenger arrived at the palace, carrying something that sent a chill through the royal court. A letter, a message directly from Sennacherib himself, and its words dripped with arrogance. "Do not let your God deceive you, Hezekiah. No other kingdom has survived me. No God has ever saved his people from my hand, and your God will be no different." It was not just a threat, it was a declaration of war against heaven itself. Sennacherib had conquered nations, destroyed temples, crushed kings beneath his feet. To him, Jerusalem was just another city waiting to be erased from history. And yet, Hezekiah did not respond with anger. He did not gather his army. Instead, he took the letter, walked into the temple, and did something no one expected. He laid it before God. He spread it out, word by word, before the holy presence, as if to say, "Lord, see what this man says about you. See how he mocks you. If you are truly God, let the world know it." It was a moment of pure surrender, a king who understood that the fate of his people rested not in swords, but in the hands of the divine. And in that silence a response came. The answer arrived through the prophet Isaiah, a man whose words carried the weight of the heavens. And his prophecy was chilling. Sennacherib will not enter this city. He will not shoot an arrow. He will not raise a shield. By the road he came, he will return, and he will fall by the sword in his own land. It was impossible. Sennacherib was the most powerful king on earth. The Assyrians had never been defeated. There were 185,000 warriors at Jerusalem's gates. And yet, Isaiah spoke with absolute certainty. Because the battle was no longer between two kings. It was between the arrogance of man and the power of the divine. And history would soon reveal that no earthly empire could ever stand against the wrath of heaven. The sun began to set over Jerusalem. The Assyrians laughed at the tiny kingdom still standing before them. They did not know that in just a few hours, their entire army would cease to exist. And when the sun rose the next morning, 185,000 men would be dead. But how? What happened that night? Was it truly an act of God, or is there a deeper mystery waiting to be uncovered? That is a question we must answer next. The night was eerily silent. The Assyrian army, 185,000 strong, lay encamped outside the walls of Jerusalem, their war machines poised for an inevitable victory. The air was thick with the scent of iron and burning torches, their weapons gleaming under the pale glow of the moon. The city trembled in anticipation of dawn, for with the first light of day, the most feared army of the ancient world would unleash its final assault. The people of Jerusalem had seen what the Assyrians had done to other cities. Their brutality was legendary. But then, it happened, something impossible. The Bible records it in just a few words. The angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 soldiers. No alarms, no battle cries, no swords clashing. When the first rays of the sun stretched over the battlefield, the entire Assyrian camp was silent, but not with the hush of an army preparing for war. It was the silence of death. 185,000 warriors lay motionless, their lifeless bodies scattered across the plains. No signs of a struggle, no wounds, no clear cause of death. The most powerful army of the ancient world was erased overnight, and Jerusalem, untouched, saved. What force could have done this? What unseen hand had intervened in a moment when all hope seemed lost? The event is recorded in ancient texts, but its true nature remains a mystery that has puzzled historians, theologians, and scholars for centuries. Was it an act of divine judgment? A plague? A supernatural force beyond human understanding? Or something even more sinister? Let's unravel the theories. For centuries, the unexplained destruction of the Assyrian army has been the subject of fierce debate. Was it the hand of God, a natural disaster, or did something far more hidden and secretive take place? Let's explore the possibilities. The biblical account is clear. This was an act of God. A divine force wiped out the mightiest army of its time in a single night, an event so absolute, so total, that no earthly power could claim responsibility. Throughout history, there are many recorded instances of supernatural forces intervening in battles. From the walls of Jericho crumbling to the Red Sea swallowing the Pharaoh's army, ancient texts often describe moments where the impossible became reality. But what does this mean? Did an angel of destruction truly descend upon the Assyrian camp? Was this a celestial force punishing arrogance and blasphemy? Or could this be evidence of something even older, a force that has shaped history from the shadows, intervening in moments when the balance of power is at stake? And if such forces exist, do they still act today? Not all believe this was an act of divine intervention. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus tells another version of events, one that hints at a deadly, unseen killer. According to his accounts, a plague of rats swarmed through the Assyrian camp, gnawing through their supplies, contaminating their food, and spreading a deadly disease overnight. By morning, the mighty warriors lay dead, struck down not by swords, but by something far more silent and uncontrollable. Was this an ancient epidemic? Could it have been an early form of biological warfare? Some historians suggest that the Assyrians may have been poisoned, either by contaminated water or a deliberate act of sabotage. Diseases like anthrax or bubonic plague could have spread rapidly in a tightly packed military camp, wiping out thousands in mere hours. But if it was a plague, why was Jerusalem left untouched? Why did the disease only strike the Assyrian army and no one else? And if this was a bioweapon, who had the knowledge to unleash it? Could an ancient secret society have possessed the knowledge of poisons and plagues long before modern science? There is another chilling possibility. What if this was not just a simple act of divine intervention, but something far more ancient and terrifying? Many ancient cultures, warriors, spirits, and beings that appear, protect, or destroy. The Mahabharata, celestial weapons, so annihilate entire armies in an instant. In Chinese history, their spirit armies wiping out Invu. Even in modern times, soldiers have strange occurrences on battle. Could the Assyrian army have been victims of something not of this world? Some believe this was a form of supernatural warfare, a battle not with swords, but with forces beyond human comprehension. Did the Assyrians unknowingly challenge an ancient power, won sacred lands? Or was this something more human? What if the destruction of the Assyrian army divine judgment, not a plague, but a deliberate act of sabotage? Some historians suggest that internal rebels, perhaps disgruntled Assyrian officers, spies, or even factions within the empire itself, could an elite group have infiltrated the Assyrian camp? Could they have poisoned their food and water? Orsolent massacre in the Assyrian Empire was powerful, but also filled with rivals, conspirators, and those seeking its downfall. If an inside force eliminated, this would be one of history's greatest cover-ups. Could this have been an act of divine rebellion, carried out by secrets of ancient warfare? And if so, what knowledge did they possess? No 185,000 men vanished overnight. An event so impossible, so chilling that defying explanation. Was it a supernatural judgment, a plague, a secret act of war, or something beyond human understanding? And if such forces exist, still be at work today? What happens when the unseen intervenes in human affairs, and will it happen again? The past holds secrets buried in the sands of time, but history has shown us one undeniable truth. When always comes, the Assyrians learned this in one night. What will our world learn next? If you seek the truth hidden beneath history's greatest mysteries, subscribe to Path to the Unknown, and because the past is never truly past, the unknown is calling. Bell, power, glory, invincibility. That was the illusion King Sennacherib carried with him after laying waste to countless cities, reducing kingdoms to ash, and mocking the gods of the vanquished. He had defied not only men, but the divine itself. And yet, despite his boasts, despite the unstoppable force of his war machine, he failed to conquer Jerusalem. His once great army, 185,000 strong, erased overnight. No battle, no struggle, just death. Humiliated, he returned to Nineveh, his mighty capital. But the shadow of that night followed him. Then the prophecy struck. Years later, within the very walls of his own sanctuary, where he once bowed before his god, Nisroch, Sennacherib met an end as violent as his conquests. His own bloodline turned against him. His own sons, the princes of Assyria, betrayed him. They struck him down in cold blood in the very temple where he sought protection. Coincidence or divine justice? For centuries, the death of Sennacherib has echoed as an ominous warning, a tale of arrogance, divine retribution, and the inescapable grip of fate. And what is most chilling? This is not the only case where rulers who mocked the divine met their untimely end. The patterns are there, hidden across time, waiting to be unraveled. Across history, we find events uncannily similar to the destruction of the Assyrian army. Ancient texts, forgotten legends, and unexplained catastrophes all hint at the same pattern, an unseen force erasing threats in a single night. Was this the hand of divine justice, a supernatural reckoning, or something more sinister lurking behind history's veil? Let's uncover three of the most hauntingly parallel cases. We return to one of the greatest biblical mysteries of all time, Egypt, a land of pharaohs and gods, where the power of man was thought to rival the power of the divine. The Israelites, led by Moses, had fled slavery, their path blocked by the Red Sea. Behind them, the thunderous march of Egypt's greatest army, an unstoppable force of war chariots and soldiers armed to the teeth. The outcomes seemed inevitable, but then the sea parted. An impossible act. The waters rose like walls of glass, allowing the Israelites to pass through. And then, the final blow. As the Pharaoh's army charged forward, the sea collapsed. In an instant, the greatest fighting force of the time was swallowed whole. Thousands of warriors gone. Not one survived. Their bodies, their chariots, their power, erased without a trace. Does this not sound eerily similar to the 185,000 Assyrians who perished outside Jerusalem? Two armies, both thought unstoppable, both wiped out in a single night, with no human explanation. Was this truly divine wrath? Or was there an unknown force, a weapon beyond our comprehension, hidden in ancient times? What did the ancients know that we do not? Fast forward nearly 3,000 years, Siberia, a land as mysterious as it is desolate. The year 1908, a quiet morning in the Tunguska region, untouched by war, unbothered by history. And then, a blinding light erupted from the sky, a force beyond imagination, struck with the power of 1,000 atomic bombs. 80 million trees, flattened, a forest turned to ash. The very earth trembled, and yet, no impact crater, no remnants of a meteorite, nothing. The cause, unknown. Eyewitnesses described an unseen force, a flash of fire that came from nowhere, and then obliteration. Much like the Assyrian army, an entire force was erased without warning. Could this have been the work of something more than nature? A force that strikes from the shadows, eliminating its target without a trace. And if it happened in 1908, could it happen again? A curse, a legend, a warning carved into stone thousands of years ago. And yet modern history tells us it may not have been just a myth. For centuries, the tombs of the pharaohs remained sealed, untouched, guarded by something unseen. Until the year 1922, when Howard Carter's expedition broke the seal of Tutankhamun's tomb. From that moment on, the deaths began. Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financer, dead within months. Arthur Mace, who helped open the burial chamber, mysteriously ill, gone shortly after. Richard Bethel, Carter's secretary, sudden and violent death. Hugh Evelyn White, a translator, found dead with a note, "I have succumbed to a curse." Skeptics say it was coincidence. Science suggests ancient bacteria. But the timing, the eerie precision, it cannot be ignored. Could it be that the pharaohs' tombs were protected by something beyond mortal understanding? Could this same force, the one that wiped out the Assyrian army, the Pharaoh's warriors, the mystery of Tunguska. Be a power that has always existed, waiting in the shadows. And if so, have we already unleashed it again? 3 events, 3 different centuries, 3 different locations, and yet the same chilling pattern repeats itself. A mighty force stands against the divine. A sudden and inexplicable catastrophe follows. Those who defy the unknown pay the ultimate price. Was the annihilation of Sennacherib's army truly an isolated event? Or was it simply one chapter in an ancient war between forces we still do not understand? And more importantly, what if this force is still watching? History has shown us that when arrogance meets the unknown, the outcome is always the same. The powerful fall, the empires crumble, and yet we continue to challenge the unseen. What secrets still lurk beneath the sands of lost civilizations? What mysteries remain buried, waiting for the right moment to strike again? Perhaps the real question is not what happened to Sennacherib's army, but rather, who will be next? In the face of annihilation, Hezekiah did something that defied all logic. He did not send forth his warriors. He did not negotiate with his enemy. He did not flee. Instead, he prayed. While the most powerful army in the world stood at his gates, while 185,000 men prepared for what they believed would be an effortless victory, Hezekiah turned inward to a power far greater than any kingdom on earth. This was not a strategy of desperation. It was an act of absolute faith. The Assyrians had iron, chariots, and unstoppable warfare, but Hezekiah had something stronger. He had the divine favor of a force beyond time. That night, the world witnessed something that should have been impossible. Not a single sword was lifted, not a single battle cry was heard, and yet, by dawn, the mightiest army of its time lay dead. It was not military strength that saved Jerusalem. It was not strategy. It was faith. A lesson written not in books, but in blood. History remembers kings who built empires, but few are remembered for trusting in the unseen. Hezekiah's decision was not one of weakness. It was a recognition of something greater. He understood a fundamental truth. Even the mightiest empire cannot defeat destiny. The story of Hezekiah and Sennacherib is not just about an ancient battle. It is about the eternal struggle between force and faith, between human power and divine will. It raises a haunting question. How often in history has the unseen shaped the fate of the world? And more importantly, could it still be happening today? History repeats itself. Again and again we see it. The rise of the proud, the fall of the arrogant. It is a pattern, an inescapable law woven into time itself. Sennacherib mocked the God of Israel. He stood before the walls of Jerusalem and declared that no power could stop him. And then he vanished. His empire continued, but he never recovered. His final days, marked by betrayal and blood, slain by his own sons, in the shadow of the gods he once claimed were invincible, he was not the last. Napoleon stood at the peak of the world, unstoppable, untouchable. He crowned himself emperor, declaring his reign was above all others. And yet, his empire crumbled, banished, exiled, a prisoner of the very world he sought to rule. Hitler, Stalin, leaders across ages, those who mocked the divine met the same fate. And what about today? Do we believe that arrogance has stopped leading men to destruction? Or is there something more sinister at play, something unseen, waiting in the shadows of history, still enforcing the laws of pride and punishment? The lesson of Sennacherib echoes through time. Those who believe they are untouchable often fall the hardest. The universe does not look kindly on those who challenge the mysteries that govern it. And now, we must ask the most important question of all. What if this story is not just history? What if it is a warning? Forces beyond our understanding have shaped history for centuries. The fall of empires, the collapse of civilizations, how many of them were caused by something greater than human hands? Some call it fate, others call it providence. But one thing is certain, history has been shaped by forces beyond our sight. And if that is true, do ancient prophecies hold clues to the future? We look back at stories like Hezekiah's and call them myths. But what if they are messages? What if the patterns of the past are still unfolding right now? What if there is a hidden war between seen and unseen powers, a battle that continues to this very day? Look at the world around you. Look at the leaders who rise, the ones who fall. Look at the moments in history that defy explanation. Wars are won before the first arrow is fired. Empires fall without a single invasion. There is a mystery beyond time, a force that does not reveal itself openly, only in the moments when history is rewritten. So the question remains, who really controls the destiny of nations? And more importantly, are we next? The Assyrian Empire, once the most feared force in the ancient world, vanished shortly after that fateful night. A kingdom built on blood, power, and conquest, reduced to dust by an unseen force. A force that defied logic, defied history, and defied every empire that stood against it. Some call it divine justice. Others believe it was a supernatural intervention, a force that still watches over sacred lands, ensuring that history does not repeat itself. But what if it does? Could an event like this happen again? Could there be an invisible hand shaping history, deciding which civilizations rise and which ones fall? Through the ages, great empires have mocked the divine, ignored the warnings, and fallen in ways no one expected. Rome, Babylon, the Ottomans, the British Empire, each believed they were invincible. Each faced an unseen force that brought them to their knees. But what about today? Our world is filled with powerful nations, mighty leaders, and people who believe they are beyond the reach of destiny. Wars rage, greed consumes, corruption spreads. Just like the Assyrians, there are those who challenge the unseen, laugh at the sacred, and believe nothing can touch them. But what if they're wrong? What if the same force that destroyed 185,000 soldiers in a single night is still watching? What if divine justice is not a story of the past, but a prophecy for the future? And if judgment comes, who will be on the receiving end? The answer may already be written in history, waiting for us to recognize it. If you seek the truth behind the mysteries of time, subscribe to Path to the Unknown and uncover the secrets hidden in plain sight. On Fire